The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. On today's episode, we are joined by Jon Norman, president at Hydrostor. Jon is a professional engineer with over 20 years' experience in the power industry, management consulting, and government. Jon currently oversees Hydrostor's strategic growth as president and was previously chief operating officer. Prior to Hydrostor, he held senior roles at Brookfield Asset Management, including leading commercial development, regulatory policy and government relations across North America and Europe for the power and utilities business. Now let's get into the episode with Jon. Welcome back, Dave and Jon.
Good to be back.
It's really nice to be back in this rainy southern Ontario day.
Rainy over here too, Dave, so I know what you're feeling. Today we're joined by guests. Oh, that's a surprise, Jon. Usually you have the rain over there.
Yeah.
Today we are joined by Jon Norman, president at Hydrostor. Welcome, Jon.
Hi, Lysandra. Hi, Jon, Dave. Good to see you guys.
Hi, Jon.
Jon, it is great to see you back. I think Lysandra was suggesting the last time you were with us was, 2021. And I know there's been a lot of things that have gone on in the industry, but actually there's been a lot of things going on with you and your company. So we're really pleased that you're joining us today. I'll start with the first question because there's some listeners that may not have heard the last podcast. And so I wonder if you would be so kind to sort of reintroduce Hydrostor and the technology that you're using, if you can, just so people, our audience, have a sense of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, of course. And it's a real pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me again. Yeah, lots happened in 2 years. So looking forward to giving you guys some updates there and our view on the industry. But for those who didn't see the first episode, Hydrostor is one of the kind of key pathways for long duration energy storage, particularly at the grid scale. So what we do is compressed air. That's our storage medium. And we have really two key advantages over what is traditional compressed air. So traditional compressed air, if your viewers aren't familiar, you're really it's kind of conceptually simple. You're just using off-peak electricity and running a compressor, and then you're storing high pressure air underground. And then when the grid needs it, you just release that air into a turbine and generate electricity. Sounds great. There's a lot of, salt caverns out there to do that with. The challenge with the sort of traditional approach, we call ourselves advanced compressed air. There's two limitations. One is you need a really large storage volume. So you really do need a salt cavern located somewhere. And that's not generally located where the grid requires it. But actually, one of the bigger issues is that because of that storage volume, you can't actually easily control or capture heat. And so one of the challenges that the traditional compressed air has had is that they burn natural gas as a fuel source to enter into the turbine. You always need a heat source when you're using ambient air to run a turbine. And that's limiting because you kind of have a combined cycle gas turbine in addition to all this storage infrastructure. So if you're going to build that where a salt cavern is, you'd probably just build a CCGT. So just in summary, what we do differently is that we actually capture heat from our compression. And we store that just in the simplest means available. And then we re-inject that heat into our process when we're generating. And then the other thing we do, which is why we're called Hydrostor, is that we use water compensation for our air pressure. And I won't get into the gory details of that one, but we didn't invent it. It exists because it's a more efficient way of storing gases underground. But it allows for a constant pressure environment underground. And the whole point of that is that it's much, much more space efficient. So that's what allows us to be able to build a cavity at the right scale where the grid needs it in bedrock. So those two advantages, being a true storage asset, no gas requirement, no emissions, and being able to flexibly site is really where our bread and butter is and why we sort of see ourselves as a locatable pumped hydro asset effectively for the grid.
No, that's great and really good the way you answered the question I was going to ask you. So I'm going to have to come at it from a different angle. And the angle I'm going to come at, which is a simple one, you're about compressed air storage, but you're called Hydrostor. Do you find that causes some bit of confusion with people because they're looking for it to be all hydraulic, and in fact, the key part of it is it's compressed air?
I mean, the short answer to your question, John, is yes. It has confused some people. It's sort of we're actually having some of this discussion internally. I mean, I think one of the things we're going to be doing in a kind of refresh of the brand generally is just making sure the prominence of advanced compressed air energy storage, what that is, having that part of the message. We're kind of caught in a place. I mean, first of all, the name does come from the fact it's kind of like stored air and water, and it dates back to early days of Hydrostor. I'm not going to lie that it hasn't occasionally generated confusion as to are we a hydro asset or are we hydrogen, and we're not. But we also sort of see that as an opportunity to educate folks, and we are really, I mean, at this point, we kind of are pretty well known in the industry as well, particularly in the US, California, especially Australia. We're really sort of seen as the third pathway for long duration storage. So a complete name change, I don't know that that's in the cards. Maybe we should just call ourselves Airstore. But Hydrostor has a certain cachet to it now as well, just given what we've been accomplishing in the industry.
I suppose as well, because you're dealing with quite a select market rather than a very broad base market. Any confusion, not the same problem as if it was a B2C product, because you would have a hell of a lot of confused consumers, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very knowledgeable segment. I think it's also important to understand, and we can get more into it when we talk more about the industry, but we're very large scale too. So we because we're building a cavity underground, we're typically doing it at 400 or 500 megawatts, and these are these are $1 billion, $2 billion projects. These are very sophisticated end users.
You'd hope.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Jon. Hydrostor was rated among the top 5 fastest growing sustainable companies in Canada by the Corporate Knights. And we have listeners that are from end users to people that are starting up businesses in this area. Can you share, as a leader, what are the key attributes that allowed you to scale Hydrostor to be at the level that you are today, by the way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I guess I'll focus it just on kind of our experience and pathway and what's been required for us. But, I think there's probably 3 key differentiators for us thus far that have really allowed us to kind of become a bit of a leader in the long duration energy storage space globally. One is that our business model is actually a bit different than a lot of the technology providers out there. There's a lot of interesting technologies out there. We often say, look, we honestly hope they all succeed. We need more solutions, not less. But what we've been doing to really accelerate our growth, first of all, we're not a lab experiment. We've intentionally avoided that. We've even made trade-offs on things like round trip efficiency to keep everything on an existing supply chain, off the shelf, proven performance. So that's how we have, backing of banks and financeable projects very early on. Because of that, actually, our business model is really to be both a technology provider and an independent power producer type developer. And that's allowed us to really leapfrog a lot of other types of projects because we've been really developing our own assets that use our proprietary advanced case technology. But we have a pretty sophisticated development team here that's been actually a big part of establishing the policy and regulatory pathway for long duration storage in places like California, Australia, parts of Canada. And we look at really replicating that model through the globe. And because we tend to punch at that level to develop our own projects and create a pathway for it, we really do strive towards and have a very world-class team. In fact, we're bringing in other elements of our leadership team who are incredibly, incredibly strong, and you can expect some announcements on that front in the near term. I think what also underlies our team is a lot of shared values. We tend to be, I don't know if it's just our Canadian roots, but we tend to be very upfront and transparent, and we're that way throughout all our stakeholders, whether they're communities, end users. We explain what works, what doesn't. And we're very upfront with each other in the company. And I really do believe you need to have that to succeed on any level in a sustained way. And I think we're all underlaid by a passion for the environment. Like that is a key driver for us. It's certainly a key driver for me. The only other thing that's been really helpful to us is flexibility. And because not only we have to talk about the flexible asset on the grid, I mean, you need to be flexible as a company. We have conditions changing all the time in our core markets, in the global environment, in policy around decarbonization, in the financing environment, who's backing us, how are those circumstances changing in private equity or otherwise. And you have to adapt or you'll be left behind. And so that's actually a tricky business model for a company. You know, you want to create things with the old management model and people have clear direction and they go forward on their tasks. But you have to sort of adapt that model a bit to allow for flexibility. Things change every week. And so we tend to do that through a lot of communication and transparency. So I think those are really things that aren't necessarily unique to us, other than the first point, but that have really led to our success.
Excellent. Just to follow up, and it's off script, so
Lysandra's not going to like that.
She's not going to like it for sure. She's smiling right now. Now she's not actually smiling, but John, I'm curious. You were talking about financial institutions and them supporting you in your endeavors. Is that international, or do you find the Canadian banks are stepping up or assisting you, or is it institutions around the world per se?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I should say, you know, Canadian institutions have been important to us, including Export Development Canada, BDC, we've worked with in our growth stages. Also, Canadian banks like National Bank actually work with us and provide credit facilities that can be really important because we're building very, very large scale projects that have massive deposit requirements and that sort of thing. So I think Canadian banks are doing what they can. I think you are correct also, Dave, in that, you know, we're a mid-sized country, small to mid-sized country in a big global world. And Hydrostor is not just a Canadian company. I mean, we're providing a global solution. Our most advanced projects are outside of the country. We have very strong relationships in those jurisdictions. And by sheer statistics, you'll end up working with a lot of those banks that also are sort of experts in those markets. So we tend to form a lot of relationships there too. But we have no plans of moving our head office. We're proudly a Canadian company, and we do appreciate the support that we've received in the past.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay, my question's about the industry, and I started thinking, well, what is this industry that you're in? And we start off, well, it's energy storage, and then energy storage can be small scale, large scale, short term, long term. You know, so at one end of it, we've got a capacitor, and at the other end of it, we've got probably what you're doing. But within the sort of larger scale, longer term storage part of the industry, what's happened over the past 2 years? Is it growing? What's happening? You know, can you give us an update?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several things that have changed. I mean, we've all been impacted by COVID, but I won't get into that. But you know, one of the big changes is that long duration storage, which, I mean, the definition varies, but we tend to look at it as 8 hours of continuous discharge or more into multi-day. Right. That is really becoming a market mover in and of itself. And we obviously saw that coming. That's what our expertise and our product is really providing. And we've been really pushing the market in that direction as well, because we know it provides advantages that are important for, you know, grid operators and planners to actually account for. But what's happening is circumstances are changing in a way that it's really strongly required. The urgency, I would say, has really increased since that time. Even Ukraine's or the invasion of Russia into Ukraine has certainly changed the energy situation in Europe. We're really looking at a stronger market entry there because they just have stronger needs for long duration storage. I think the easiest way of thinking about it is kind of, well, why would you need 8 hours plus or multi-day storage? It's to replace fossil infrastructure. I mean, it's that simple. right? Yeah, you want to use renewable or clean fuels to power that storage. But if you don't have the continuous discharge for a long enough period of time, you just can't replace natural gas or coal infrastructure, regardless of what the community says. So you need a backbone of technologies like ours, not just uniquely ours, that allow that to happen. And that's changed a lot, the need for that. And you've seen the wildfire situation throughout, I mean, certainly what's happening now, but also been triggered through electrical utilities in California. It's had a corresponding impact on the grid. There's been lots of reliability events in California and elsewhere. And as a result, they've really been creating mandates, even around long duration storage. New South Wales, where we're very active, has put in place a 2,000 megawatt mandated legislative requirement for 8-hour plus storage by 2030. We're seeing a lot of these developing around the world. And I think it's in part because that urgency is increasing. Plus, we're all seeing the impact of climate change. So that's only, further reinforcing the push for decarbonization. I honestly think the biggest factor has been almost climate adaptation, which has been, our grid is really not secure enough. And no one's really going to definitely no one's building a new coal plant. Few people are building new natural gas plants. So what are you replacing this infrastructure with as it's retiring? We spoke about that 2 years ago, but we're really seeing it happen a lot more now. And we've been well positioned to take advantage of it.
Jon, you just stepped into sort of the next question. It's a great segue. Can you share and convey some of the projects that you're currently undertaking that are significant to your organization?
Yeah, we have several. I think I probably would have talked to your listeners last time about our Goderich project, which is contracted to the grid operator here in Ontario. It is a smaller scale asset at a salt cavern, but using our advanced fuel-free process. And that's been in place it's been COD since 2020. So it's been an important proof point for us. We've had lots of visits to that facility. In fact, if there are people interested, we're happy to facilitate those kinds of tours or even have a virtual tour of the facility. But really on the back of that, we've been developing as an IPP developer, lots of projects in core markets. We have a pipeline that's growing, but we have two really advanced projects that are really important to us. One is in California. It's a 500 megawatt, 8-hour facility in Southern California that is providing that full amount of capacity to the grid. It's an important reliability piece for the plan in California going forward. And that project's really been advancing ahead. In fact, since the last time we spoke, we've signed $1 billion offtake contract at that facility with one of the utilities in California. We're actually in discussions with several others for the balance of that offtake. See, this is why you need grid stability.
That's exactly. That was perfect. Someone didn't do the light switch, did they?
Well, that's right. I gave them the signal, the bat signal. Well, we're actually in the new office now. That's why I don't have anything on my wall right now. But people are figuring out the light switches, to be totally honest. So anyways, that California project is a really, really showcase great project for us, has a lot of interest, has been achieving lots of milestones. And that's going to be a very large scale asset, as well as we're looking at other projects in California as well. But we've also been advancing what we call our Silver City project in New South Wales in Australia, which is actually just a very interesting, different use case. It's supplying a microgrid backbone solution to a community called Broken Hill in the western part of New South Wales. It's actually where Mad Max was filmed, so you have an idea what the landscape looks like around there. And that's a 200 megawatt 8-hour facility. So we're actually doing that at a mine with subsurface infrastructure that's available. We can do that. It's just our bread and butter is really putting these facilities where they're required on the grid. It just so happens that there's this strong use case in that part of the Australian grid. But because of all that interest in these mandates that are developing, we're very actively in early development phases on several other projects, including in Ontario and New York and other parts of the US, definitely across Australia, and looking at market entry into parts of Europe and parts of Asia.
Excellent.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining us today. To end off this episode, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, I think, look, the industry is maturing. We talked a lot about that already. We really feel Hydrostor is positioned perfectly for this. So there's a lot of stay tuned for your listeners. I think we've had some really interesting announcements over the last year. One that I actually didn't mention on this particular episode is just the backing of Goldman Sachs, which has been really crucial to us over the last year and a half. Fantastic partner. We're really sort of seen as their long duration energy storage play globally. And we're really taking that mandate seriously and are well capitalized now to pursue these growth opportunities that I was just mentioning before. And so there's a few things coming down the pipe. I alluded to some of our leadership growth and leadership changes, which are the intent of which is to really position us for this growth in the future. So we're really expanding in size as a company to take advantage of all these opportunities. Really world-class team. We're going to have some additional announcements out over some of our chief development officer, chief technology officer that's joined from just key positions in the industry elsewhere. And, with that, we're really looking at additional milestones being achieved on those key projects. There's additional contract announcements coming down the pipe as well. And we really look to have this underlay our growth. So I think the next time we speak, we're going to have a lot more detailed announcements to give you that are really building on some of the growth of the industry. And it's interesting when we talk to decision makers and thought leaders in our core jurisdictions, we're not really talking about compressed air. We're really trying to talk about long duration storage and have that jurisdiction run a competition, do something to get the most efficient outcome or the best solution for that particular need. But you do have to define what your needs are for long duration storage. So we're really trying to take a bit of a leadership mantle in the long duration storage industry globally, just on our perch at Hydrostor. So look forward to our next chat for sure.
Thanks, Jon. Jon, what was your biggest takeaway?
I think the takeaway for me is that we often hear a lot of chatter about where we get our energy from. Should it be solar? Should it be tidal? Whatever. And in a way, long-term energy storage is not the sexy end. We've had Tesla and his batteries, and we've had things like that. But it seems to me that long-term storage of this type has got to be part of what we've referred to in the past as the silver buckshot for solving the problem. And it's one of those things, I suppose, because it's partially behind the fence, it's not seen, but I think it's probably going to have a very key role to play in our energy transition.
Thanks for that. Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
It sounds terribly exciting on the growth of your organization, Jon, and the technology. So as an investor, I'm always looking at, what companies to be looking for. I'm really pleased it's a Canadian company. I think it's something that we don't talk about very much, about how Canada or Canadians can lead in many capacities, especially in this marketplace. So I'm really excited to learn the growth that's going on and expectations going forward. So I wish you and your team the best of luck. I'll be watching very closely. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. It's much appreciated, and we're really looking forward to it.
My biggest takeaway is a line Jon said during the episode, and that's, you'll have to adapt or you'll be left behind, which is something we reiterate all the time during these episodes. So thanks for that. All right. Thanks all for a great episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoyed it.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn post. See you next week.